Hello and welcome to episode 6 of After the Hack. I'm your host, Banseka, and I'm joined by Peter, Tom, and Femi. After the Hack is a limited podcast series where we'll be breaking down the new ITV drama, The Hack, which is all about the phone hacking scandal. We're going to be doing a deep dive into The Hack and what came after. So, we are at episode 6 now of the drama. We've got journalist Nick, meeting Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, who persuades him there's still some work to be done. And then we've also got some shocking information that he'll discover next, which has the potential to kind of blow the lid on everything. As ever, we'll start with the big picture gut reactions. What do we think of this episode? Femi, I'm going to come to you first.
Without wanting to skip to the end, it just massive highlights how the order of this entire show was just wrong. Like the scene with Millie Dowler's parents should have been in the first episode.
Yeah. Would you have done like a Quentin Tarantino thing where you just chop up the chronology?
Well, I cut the scene with Dave Cook being arrested, swap it for the Millie Dowler scene.
Confusing.
Because I spent the entire show thinking, what has he done wrong? How does he become the bad guy? Am I watching him break bad?
Yeah.
And instead, you could have grounded it in, there is a real grieving family here.
Yeah.
That would have been the emotional core of how did they manage to screw over these people? How did because if you start there and then you start looking at politicians playing their games, protecting their jobs, and you're just like, but what about them?
Yeah.
You'd be on that the entire time.
Because the audience knows that end point. You know, most people, even people who vaguely know about the phone hacking scandal, they have that's what they know. So it's not really a spoiler to start with that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It'd be like, hey, that thing you know, that tragedy you know, here's how it went wrong.
Yeah. 6 months earlier.
Yeah. It's also, it's strange that it's played out as we've had sort of 2 or 3 personal explanations. So we've had Sienna Miller describing what became her inquiry testimony about the impact on her and her family of being hacked. We've had sort of Sean Hoare talking about what it was like working at News of the World. So we've had these potted moments of people personally explaining this is what it was like to live through this moment. And then to come to the Dowlers and they not really get to... that in this, docudrama, this fictionalized account, they don't get their own moment to shine, which is what happens at the inquiry in the end. The very powerful testimony they gave at the inquiry, saying what it was like to feel as though our daughter might still be alive because we were led to believe as a result of the voicemail messages disappearing, we thought our daughter might still be alive. In the docudrama, we get an admittedly quite emotional meeting of them saying, we've been really impacted by this, we don't want it all coming out to light, but we trust you to go ahead and do it. That's quite a limited opportunity for that side of the story to play out compared to the way that Sienna Miller, for example, gets to give, the actress playing Sienna Miller, this fictionalized Sienna Miller, gets to put across the impact on her. And I mean, I don't want to get across that like, oh, they should have been really kind of exploited, they should have hammed up and they should have been crying. I don't think that much, because they were very powerful, the Dowlers, in all of their public representations. They were very steadfast and committed in making sure that their daughter's memory wasn't just reduced to hacking and that they got justice for it. But to limit that part of the story to just that one scene of Nick Davies asking for permission, I thought, again, kind of moved the story away, not from what happened to the Dowlers, but how did Nick Davies find out about the Dowlers and what did Nick Davies do with it?
This is very unfortunate in a way, because it was a key part of the trial I sat through for 8 months, the Millie Dowler, because it's in the newspaper. They listened to her voicemail messages. They then deleted in a second edition. Rebecca Brooks is in constant phone call. She was on holiday with Andy Coulson about it. She's obsessed by child murders. And what happens as hue and cry, because they hack the phone, there's a message erroneously left from a printer's that offering a job. So they all descend on this print work. It's an amazing weekend. And that is documented in court. Kuttner's over it, who's the managing editor. It's like you have so much information from that. You could have said it back in 2006 or whatever that happened, let alone... What people forget is she was already back in the news because Levy Belfield had been prosecuted. It took them that long. He only got prosecuted in 2011, just a few months before. So she was back in the news 5-6 years after the murder. And the papers got done for contempt because they kept on saying he was guilty. So she was kind of centre frame. We know now, and that's thanks to Nick's book, that News of the World, or rather, it's News UK. It was the top in News International. It's Will Lewis, who now runs the one's Washington Post, that they were, oh my God, okay, it's low-level celebrities. What will make this go mainstream, Main Street? And it was the Soham murders or McCann's. And they knew, they must have known, well, of course they knew, by this point they'd all been hacked, and Millie Dowler was the touchstone. And it's really well done in the book, actually, you didn't say, that they were just about to get their merger with BSkyB. So it's like, it
days
already
away,
gone
days
away.
Yeah.
And it's like these two forces, then it explodes and they have to back off. They come out 2 years later, they fail. It is corporately so important for Murdoch at this moment, because this is the way to survive. They don't actually, to make, you know,
Can you sort of explain just a little bit more about what's so important about the BSkyB?
Well, yes, because this was, they could see what was happening to print.
Right.
They could also see what was happening, you know, thanks to the internet. You know, people with cable didn't matter. You get your internet service, right? Virgin I had at the time, I didn't really care about Virgin cable. I cared about the internet service. So they wanted to build a hub where the newspapers could sit with BSkyB. They didn't own all of BSkyB. They owned 39%. 39%. So they had a significant interest, but they couldn't do whatever they liked with it. So they were making a bid for the whole thing, even though that kind of been restricted back in the 90s when they set it up. So a lot of their lobbying, and this came out in Leveson, was like, let's keep this away. So be nice to Cameron or Blair or Brown to allow this merger, because that will preserve the papers. We'll integrate our TV, movie, and news arms. There'll be this digital hub that James is going to build, which would be like Netflix and news and everything, because they knew.
And it would have completed the European empire as well, because they'd already done much the same in Italy and Germany,
Exactly.
where the Sky Empire had been building up, and really the UK was the last piece of the puzzle to complete this European mega corporation, where Sky and Murdoch would have been the king of broadcasting in Europe.
And they can see what's happening with Comcast to eventually take over Sky, with Disney, the streamers coming online, that this is the future strategically. And James comes along, takes over 2008, and then suddenly these bodies start coming out the woodwork, you know, literally, you know. So that is like such a dramatic ticking clock. So there's the corporate level I'm missing there, and then you're right, the gritty level. Why couldn't you start in 2006 or something like that? I mean, it's missing, they all descend there. But there was one interesting thing for me as a journalist, because I remember this time. Do you remember it is Millie Dowler's phone hacked, you know? And I forget the subhead is something
News
like...
of the World journalists deleted messages.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and it's done quite well this way. We don't know that, right? And that's because the phone records and what the companies did at that time, and they did go a lot on that, and that actually what's most likely, and this came out in the Leveson inquiry and it came out in the trial, is that by listening to them,
it activated the process of them being
deletion
deleted.
to create more space. And so by listening to them, without deleting, not deliberately deleting, by listening to them, that reactivated the sense that she could be alive. Now, Nick says, justifiably, that he doesn't know if the time when they could access the phone message to her parents was, of course, the time when Mulcair, on his own admission, no doubt he hacked her phone, and they thought they were helping her. But this is where we get into the thing. People don't understand about journalism. I remember this I had this issue with, especially over COVID and some of the things government doing there, and the whole herd immunity. Like, this is such public interest. Just because I got one sub-fact wrong, right? Just because they doesn't necessarily mean that he physically deleted the message to think they're alive. They thought she was alive, he hacked the phone. A detail is not as important as the public interest, and that's the public interest defense in journalism. The first, nobody wants to defend is truth, right? You think that's going to be your best defense. It's a very difficult defense in defamation, because it's very difficult to prove everything to 100% certainty. But I told this story, which is largely true, and it's so true or not, it really matters, right? Yeah. If somebody's, and public interest isn't just, it's interesting that someone's having an affair. It's like, this is offense. Democracy, the state is about murder, you know what I mean? And a lot of people just don't get this with journalism. You're going to get
the headline of the Guardian story. It was substantially true. They had hacked the voicemail messages of a murdered teenager. And then that additional feature, which, as Nick says both in the docudrama and in Hack Attack was corroborated by all his sources at the time.
At that time.
Nobody knew what had happened. When he spoke to people, they said, well, we knew messages were disappearing, and really, consequentially, they were being deleted because she'd been hacked, because it activated this process. If no one had listened to her voicemail messages, they would not have been
but
deleted.
they hadn't physically.
They hadn't actively gone out of their way to say, we need to delete messages to get more space. But that had happened.
By listening to him, activate the process whereby it goes, oh, old messages, let's create space for new ones.
And this links to one of my favorite thing that's said in this episode, that scene where you have Dave Cook and Nick Davies in his flat talking about how Dave Cook manages to cope with the murder scenes that he constantly arrives at, given that he says he has a phobia of blood. And he says that he basically deletes the blood mentally in his mind so that he can just focus on the details, the toes, the fingers, etc. So he pretends that those things that would make it too unmanageable for him don't exist, and focuses on the main goal. And the blood analogy also applies to just generally this fight in general of, in order to deal with the sheer mountain of human suffering that they're actually processing, whether it's Daniel Morgan, whether it's the hundreds of people whose phones were hacked, or the Millie Dowlers, the Dowlers family, in order to process that as a human being and keep going and keep doing your job, you have to almost turn down your emotions on the literal blood involved in order to just see, how do I achieve justice? Because if you were to emotionally invest, you'd be broken by it. Because he also has his own life to deal with, which is also falling apart in the background. And so as a human being dealing with this stuff, working in politics, you often have to dial it down. And the problem is, if you are a good person or a bad person, affects how that affects you. Because there are people who work in journalism who dial down the blood, who pretend that that's not there, subtract the human cost of the stuff that they're actually talking about, and that's what enables them to act like the people they're dealing with aren't really people that matter. And it enables it to hack people's phones. It enables them to tell lies which they know are going to severely undermine a democracy and cause lots and lots of suffering. However, if you're a good person, you are dialing down the blood so that you can actually fight for these people even more effectively.
So this is a problem, isn't it? Because, if you've got to be an effective surgeon, you don't want to feel the pain of the person you're operating on. Or even, they're under anesthetic. If you're a trauma specialist, I've been out on the helicopter doing dramas, you arrive, somebody's under a bus, right? You've gone up to, I've been there, not that I could help. Or somebody was stabbed, actually, their lung was hanging out in front of their son. You've got to just switch off. So there's something about that coldness of journalism. I mean, I remember when I first broke a story about, when I first took over Byline with Graham Johnson, this story about Rebecca Brooks and Andy Coulson. I had to send the rights replies. The first time I'd actually done that properly, in 2016, 9 years ago now, I thought, I felt bad. I felt two people were going to be really sad, and then the brutalizing process of this specialization, whether it's a doctor, a journalist, or or a police officer looking at a murder scene. Don't do it for too long. Or a campaigner, that there is a cost to this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we get a bit of a sort of celebration of journalism in this episode in the form of the British Press Awards. Basically, we get the News of the World scooping up most of the awards, and then the Guardian wins. I think it was best paper of the year, wasn't it? It's meant to have won.
Yeah.
Is that realistic? Is that really what happened? What do we think?
Yeah, and it's strange that they sort of have on screen for a second a little title that says this really happened, but it's not really clear what they're referring to, because it shows a food fight happening while Nick's trying to explain the ongoing corporate cover-up and the panic at News International from the revelations. What did really happen is there were the British Press Awards that year. They had to physically separate the Guardian's table from the News of the World table because they were worried if they were sat too close together, there would be real physical confrontations and maybe even fights and violence between them. And then, yes, News of the World won Scoop of the Year, Investigation of the Year, several other stories, and then the Guardian won Paper of the Year, which was seen as a bit of a shock given that, this award panel, which is mostly made up of newspaper executives and people within the industry, it's a private event where they pay thousands of pounds for a table at a piss-up, and really you're paying for an award and a good night out for your staff, and not really for an independent accolade of good journalism. It's nothing like that. But then to kind of have this almost throwaway award to the Guardian of, Mazza Mahmood did brilliantly this year, and the News of the World showbiz column got all these amazing scoops on cricket corruption and celebrities and gutter journalism, and the Guardian did some nice things as well. That really did happen. But it's a strange way to represent. Again, we said this time and time again talking about this show, without that surrounding explanation of this was part of a wider rotten culture in journalism, that they're all patting themselves on the back for being so brilliant while they're doing incredibly horrible things. I mean, obviously, some of those awards for journalism, like the News of the World cricket corruption scandal, or the cricket corruption scandal that was exposed by News of the World, was good journalism. But it's mixed in with this celebration of, meanwhile, what a fantastic paper it is, while it's in the middle of all of these major public allegations of hacking and privacy intrusion and hundreds of thousands of pounds in settlements. So it really did happen, but they don't get across this sense of it's happening at the time that we're exposing all of this wrongdoing.
So I mean, I went to Press Gazette. I was that year 2014 because of covering the trial, and I won the social media award or something. And what they do is they try to co-opt you. I won't go back there again. It is a piss up, and because I was this outsider, sort of microblogging on Twitter when it was only 140 characters, the whole trial. I was invited to several press club, Society of Editors, and they all, I remember the Society of Editors, Saeed Javid was talking, he was culture minister then, and he mentioned my book. I'd written a book about the trial, and I remember Bob Satchwell, he's no longer with us. Oh, Peter, it's not that bad, come on. And so they try to co-opt you. They give you a bit of an award, but stay on side. And even those things, they're always big out. I'm not sure about the cricket corruption scandal, because I bet Mazhar Mahmood, we know Mazhar Mahmood constantly for 12 years purged himself, used the Daniel Morgan suspects as his acolytes, bugged people, fitted them up with drugs, and then was caught in perjury in court over to the constable. So, I'm not sure that story stands up now. The two they always rave about is like, oh yeah, we got MP's expenses. That looks very dodgy in retrospect. Heather Brooke actually got the data. Then somehow they got the CD of all the expenses. And then this is, our friend at the Washington Post, Will Lewis. And then they release it strategically, starting some MPs more than others, right? I'm still not sure. So they paid a security guard £100,000 for that. Is this good journalism? Are we sure that's quite how it happened? Are you sure? Are we sure? Absolutely sure it wasn't hacked in any way? I don't know. I'm not alleging it is, but it's not as clear cut as it thinks. And the other classic...
It's cast a cloud over everything they've ever celebrated. As this is the journalism you're trying to attack by coming after. And look at all these wonderful things you've done. How did you get that wonderful thing?
Yeah. So that's why, for me, the actual awards, they felt self-aware to me. Like they were actually making the point. Like, we've done all this amazing journalism, but we cheated, and that's why we're giving the Guardian the best actual paper, because they're the ones that expose the fact that you got all this by cheating.
Yeah, there'll be enough judges on that. The last one I must mention, because it's constantly brought up by the Mail, is their defence of their naming murderers, the Stephen Lawrence murders. Look, they were against the public inquiry. This is like 2009. They had constantly, actually attacked the Lawrence family. It's only this last moment they have the guts to name the murders. It's partly because Neville Lawrence is a plaster for Paul Dacre.
Oh, yes.
And they meet that way.
What?
But, yes, he was his plaster. Now, it's fine, but you can't then go and say, you didn't do those investigations into the murder. It's late. It's 10 years on you do this thing. And anyway.
It's incredible how many of these major moments in British journalism are completely serendipitous. If it weren't for Mr. A listening to that particular Radio 4 programme at that time, he never would have told Nick Davies anything. If Stephen Lawrence's dad hadn't gone and plastered Paul Dacre's house, they wouldn't have named the victims. A lot of this stuff just comes... I mean, I guess that's true of any journalism.
It's highly circumstantial.
Yeah. And it's personal connections. That is that.
On that point, Amelia, the other Guardian journalist, coming to Nick Davies and saying, why is your name on my piece? I found that scene a little weird. She came in very, very hot in terms of like, you did this, you did this, you did this. He's very, well, I didn't really want my name to be on there. And then she makes this little point that I found weird, which is the Guardian preaches about the kind of society that it wants to build, but it doesn't really live up to it, which I feel is her basically saying it's kind of sexist to have put a man's name on this. And then Nick Davies responds by saying, basically, I've worked on this for 3 years and had my life destroyed. I deserve my name on the byline. To which she says, oh, when you're attacked, you just attack back. Now, the thing is, he's right. he put more into this article. His name should be on it, anything associated with the hacking scandal. However, she's also right, but in a way that's not explicitly said. Because one of the reasons that Nick Davies has the freedom to do everything he does in this show is because he's very, very close to Alan.
Yeah.
You have this boys club right at the top of The Guardian that is able to allow Nick Davies to go off and be the cowboy, which is able to do all this. So, she points at a problem, but the problem is behind the problem she's pointing to.
Yeah. It's sort of the theme of this episode, because we've now got the alliance of the journalists, the politicians, and the lawyers all working their different sides of the story to bring more information to light and to make more things happen. I think that scene with Amelia was probably dramatised more than the reality, because Amelia herself had been working on her contact jingle for many, many years. And again, it's another parallel track of all this amazing information and all these amazing disclosures, which the show doesn't get. It's almost she's, again, introduced far too late on into the story. So they have to dramatise their encounter as this sort of who gets the credit for the investigation. And
she's named. It's the breaking story, the famous headline, Millie Dowler's phone, is Nick and her.
Yeah.
But maybe there's making a point. I mean, it's very difficult to know without... Anyway, you give a book to a dramatist. To what extent are you then consulted on the dramatization? You may object, but you have no power veto. That's why Alistair didn't want to necessarily get involved in this process with ITV. And so this depiction, I don't know if it happened. Your bigger point, though, completely, is that, these are quite sexist organisations, or even not sexist, still, because we now have Kath Viner, who's a female editor. It's top-down power control. Your stories are stopped. You might not get a byline. It's not as bad as like News of the World, where there'd be byline stealing. But talk to any journalist. But it's my bloody story. Somebody else's byline in it, because they get more money and they go. So, it depicts something. Whether it depicts that particular reality with Nick and Amelia then, or more general reality, they are top-down organisations. And in this case, you're right, two not public school, but two old mates been for 30 years.
I think that's a good spot, to be honest. It's good that they're trying to also show, okay, the Guardian's not perfect. They've just commissioned me for something, so I'm not going to say anything too bad.
They're really good paper. They're getting better.
They're actually an amazing paper. They've never made any mistakes.
I've got a weird anecdote. Have you seen this? There's a YouTube channel called Cinema Sins, where they basically go through an entire movie and they'll point out little things that this film did wrong, sort of thing. And one of the fun quirks they do is when a character in the film points out a problem with the film itself, like almost self-awarely, and the person will say, that person would be great at CinemaSins. And there was a moment here where one of the characters, I think it was Gordon Brown actually, who points out, the Millie Dowler thing, that means it's no longer about whiny celebs. Like, you've pointed out the problem with your show.
It's not until the penultimate episode where somebody says, finally we can show it's not about whiny celebrities, with the previous 4 episodes being about Max Clifford, Max Moses, Sienna Miller.
I've got a bone actually to pick with this show, which we have talked about a little bit already, which is, where the fuck is Tony Blair? Like, why is he... He's come out of this very, very clean. By the time this episode comes out, he might be the king of Gaza for all we know. So he's maybe just very prescient in my mind, because he still looms very large over our politics. To be fair, David Cameron also doesn't really appear, aside from telling us it's the coalition days. Gordon Brown is in it, obviously, somewhat extensively towards the end, but he very much comes through it, I think, as someone quite heroic. So we're not really seeing these prime ministers, various different prime ministers, who've all to various degrees had to do a deal with the devil. We're not really seeing that.
Well, more than deal with the devil. The best one that came out in the trial, because it's the night she actually goes back home and fights with Ross Kemp and is arrested, is when she's partying with David Blunkett. She's partying with David Blunkett. So, in this earlier, obviously the problem is we're set in 2011, Blair's no longer in politics, but back in the day when he was Prime Minister and Blunkett was Home Secretary, they would party a lot with Rebecca, and there's one occasion where they're all meeting up and she goes back, she's been partying with Blunkett, and then in the trial, and it's a shame it's not in this, they hack his voicemail and realise he's got a love child. And it goes, and Coulson turns up and says, we're going to publish this. right? And this is the Home Secretary or former, that level both of proximity, they're partying together, going to Rebecca Brooks's dues, the big parties, they're shipping Norton set, riding horses with them. But then she's turning up going, her deputy is, her editor is going, I've got this stuff on you.
Do you think they understand that they're vulnerable? Because they're doing this thing where they're deliberately, David Blunkett, whoever, they're doing this thing where they're deliberately pulling themselves closer to these people in the hope that we will get good press and we will be protected. And so is there an understanding from them that this is a risk action? It could go either way because the tables could turn at any moment, and it may be more fortuitous actually for them to just print a load of dirt about us.
Well, you're seeing it now. He said he wouldn't ever appear in the Sun, Keir Starmer, as part of his campaign promise, appears there all the time. He did go
Keir
to
Starmer break a promise.
He did go to the party. So what you're told is, we've got to deal with these people. They'll get our message across, and better get them on side. But or so they turn on them anyway. I think there's also personal relationships happen here. People just get fond of each other. And as I said, I think in the previous episode, Rebecca Brooks, very charming, very fun. She likes a drink. She doesn't seem threatening at all. I think, she's nice. And if I'm mates with her, I might not be on the front page in a bad way.
Win-win.
But obviously it never happens like that.
But just on Tony Blair, I mean, this period, because again, everything has accelerated so quickly towards the last couple of episodes, but from sort of January 2011 through to July, when the Millie Dowler Guardian expose comes out, there is so much happening behind the scenes at News International.
Yeah.
By this point, they founded the Management and Standards Committee, which was this top-level executive, which had Rebecca Brooks, Will Lewis, who's now at the Washington Post. In Nick Davies' book, he alleges that it's Will Lewis who leaks certain bits of information to make sure that News International executive is more under fire than another. All of the effort becomes about protecting Rebecca and whose head will roll instead, and how do we protect the BSkyB deal. So that's going on behind the scenes. Also going on behind the scenes is Rebecca Brooks herself trying to save her career, and she's getting messages from her good friend Tony Blair, who's telling her, you can wade through the storm, it'll be absolutely fine. Why don't you create a kind of inquiry like the Hutton inquiry? You offer to do this, you propose that there's this big open inquiry that exonerates you and gets through. I think you'll get through it. Nick Davies has seen these emails, which basically are Tony Blair saying to Rebecca Brooks, don't worry, you can get through it, just follow my advice. And he's advising her through the explosive period after the Dowler revelations have come out.
To be completely fair, because this came out in the trial, these emails, right? It is her note of a conversation with Blair to James Murdoch, who replies, what are you doing on email, right? Because they know the police look at the email. One thing, do any of you understand why Dave Cook was arrested? It's the beginning of the show. So this is what the MSC do. They realise they're on the hook for these thousands of phones. What should we do? Let's snow the police with hundreds of thousands of emails about payments to police. And in that process, they dob in two people. One is Chris Huhne, because you have this thing about Vicky Price, his wife, and
his speeding offence.
Speeding offence and saying she was driving and wasn't.
So
that
that's
comes
the
out.
Liberal Democrat MP.
Yes. The Liberal Democratic Energy Minister in the coalition. He was one MP. He was quite a senior minister. The other one is Dave Cook. Because what they do is that in this disclosure of her Elvedon, both the police are completely overwhelmed by these 100,000 email, have to create 100 more staff. There's emails between Dave Cook and Mike Sullivan, who we do see in this episode, who's the Sun crime reporter who helps trigger events, the Daniel Morgan member, that they're talking about a book. And that's when, about to become a core Leveson participant, he gets arrested. That's what this is. Nothing to do with me. He doesn't arrested giving me anything at that moment. So the cleverness of that Management Standards Committee, the way they deleted 20 million emails every time they asked to preserve them. But, I remember during the trial this, it's not about email deletion, it's about email retention. We need to do maintenance because it was creaking at the seams.
It's just incredibly convenient that after Coulson resigned, the deletion ramped up by an order of magnitude.
Every time that came out in the trial, and that's why the case was, this is called... I think the spoliation of evidence, but it's that's one of the cases against Rebecca Brooks in the Silver cases, was the deletion and destruction of evidence. The way they managed to hide that as maintenance, and then the way these vendettas against their enemies, Huhne and Dave Cook, in a way that's a bigger story. If only it's like being able to see the Root newsroom, if only you could see the bad guys planning this.
Yeah.
There's just briefly there was another instance of very clever leaking, but via the Telegraph, to do with the BSkyB case, because Vince Cable was in charge of the regulatory process, and he was being very judicious, as was his role, but the Telegraph had secretly recorded him saying, "I've gone to war with Murdoch."
So
now, the Telegraph had that for a long time.
I remember
but then Robert Peston reported on it, and he was potentially allegedly leaked it by Will Lewis, who was then previously his best mate when they worked at the Telegraph together, who was then probably at the Washington Post by then. Or
No, he was
on the Management and Standards Committee.
Yeah.
So via his previous connections with the Telegraph, he'd been able to leak information that got Vince Cable removed as the regulatory block against the BSkyB bid.
I remember that vividly. Yeah.
And that was two, I think they're still around. Maybe Heidi Blake was one of them. Anyway, it's two people posing to be Vince Cable's constituents. So it's not, I mean, using subterfuge like that, you have to have it was kind of phishing experience. But you're right.
It was one piece they'd acquired many sort of gotchas in that recording.
Yeah.
And they'd held on to this for a very convenient amount of time.
Because the Telegraph
didn't want it to
opposed
happen.
the merger. The Telegraph, the other newspapers didn't want News UK or News International as well to get Sky as well, because they'd have no chance against them. So you could say the Telegraph suppressed that in their own interest. But these people are still around. Will Lewis, very, very powerful, runs the Washington Post, all the stuff around John Ford, and obviously Robert Peston, he's the political editor of ITV.
So this story also shows us Jackie's involvement as well, with how the Met has sort of failed to tell her about some sort of potential corruption. Jackie's, of course, Dave's now ex-wife.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose, what does this part of the story sort of tell us about the inner workings of the Met as well?
Well, one thing it tells you, they didn't know, and just like Alice didn't know about all the News of the World thing, the Met were very compartmentalised in there and very, very wary of anything to do with Murdoch and maybe government. So, they saw Blair and Blunkett consorting with Rebecca Brooks. They're not going to challenge Rebecca Brooks. I mean, they're not directly appointed the Met Commissioner by the Home Secretary, but partially appointed. So, and I think it comes from the top. You see a riot of inappropriate behaviour. I don't mean in any sexual way, just proximity. I mean, get to news proprietors.
Too cozy.
And so you're going to follow along that line. So, they all get columns. Stevens, Heyman, and then John, who's the one in this one? Yates.
Yeah.
They all get, good coverage in the paper. Yates of the Yard. They all get columns. They leave and get some retainer. And all they're doing is following in the footsteps of their political masters.
Well, I'm just glad that the Metropolitan Police is beyond reproach now.
Well, it has stopped that proximity with the press, though. That did end in 2011.
But that was the sort of, Peter's talked about the top level stuff, but then there was, someone within the police had potentially sold information about Jackie to a News of the World reporter or a private investigator working for the News of the World. Yeah. And that was, quite rightly, a major breach of what was seen to be a secure piece of information. So not only have you got these top-level political connections and this revolving door between someone who's meant to be a very high-ranking police officer who then becomes a sort of tell-all gossip columnist for a major newspaper, but then within the ranks of the police itself, this ongoing corruption and backhanding of information and illegal payments and bribery. So again, it's things that had come up much earlier in the series, and we had hints of it very early on in the first couple of Dave Cook, Daniel Morgan episodes. And then it feels like that story has looped back together with Jackie being revealed that the police not only did they have this information for a very long time, they knew about it for a very long time, but they hadn't investigated it because they simply had so many documents. And have we really ever come to the core of how the police simply didn't investigate the leads that they had?
So look, the thing was, the Leveson 2, people forget this, which is only held back not to contempt the trials. So Leveson 1 happens in 2012 to 13, and there's a pause while all these trials happen, because how can we get evidence that might prejudice a jury? It's only been paused 2 years. Now we have the phone hacking trial, takes much longer, takes 8 months. There are 2 dozen other trials for payments to public officials. And then the second half should have looked at this relationship between police and the press and the money. We calculated that the Sun alone to public officials. I look at some of the sums that had merged in this, had paid $4 million over a process of about 5 or 6 years to public. They were bribing people. Now, unfortunately, the Bribery Act only came in force 2011-12. It was under misconduct in public office law, and that meant all of the 30, 40 people who pled guilty to that got convicted, but none of the journalists who suborned them, who sort of abetted them, because the jury, understandably, would say, well, they're not in public office, right?
Yeah.
Had it been under the Bribery Act, they would all been banged up too. So that volume of corruption, as it's small everyday things. Give me somebody's address, give me their number, give me their police files. Give me their member. That was from the Daniel Morgan days, because basically Southern Investigations was ex-cops or active corrupt cops selling stuff to private investigators, selling on to the press. That went on from 1987 onwards. Sorry, end of lecture.
No, but it's all the loose threads that we are introduced to right at the end of this show, this dramatic climax of all these different threads have tied together around the Millie Dowler revelations, around the collapse of News of the World, around the way that News of the World, News International's desperate defence brings Dave Cook under scrutiny, brings the way they threw out the free emails for Edmondson. They found these free emails to Edmondson, which very directly implicated him in illegal activity. They very selectively released those emails to distract attention away towards particular figures to save those at the top. It all ties these threads together, and yet in real life, those threads haven't been resolved, because we still haven't had the second part of the inquiry, which would have been very specifically on corporate mismanagement and mispractice and corporate governance failures at News International, and corruption between the police and press, and illegal payments, and that's not been resolved.
What do we make of, we picked it up a little bit already, but what do we make of that? It is one scene with Millie Dowler's parents, isn't it? Where we finally see the kind of ordinary victims of this hacking scandal. What do we make of that scene? Did it feel satisfactory in any way?
Felt like delayed gratification. Felt like not gratification, obviously, but it felt like basically this scene should have come on a lot sooner.
When you say it should have started it, really.
Yeah, it should have started this entire show. It felt arguably disrespectful to them, to have them be this Easter egg at the end rather than be the core of the show.
Yeah.
Well, I think in reality they have the Dowlers themselves have quite rightly and perfectly within their right to do so, tried to step back from the explosion of publicity they had both after the murder of their daughter but also following the phone hacking scandal. They were personally incredibly powerful to feel confident enough to come forward to relive that horrible tragedy, and then to talk about the experience they had of being hacked, by having this impression that she may still be alive, and then discovering that she had been hacked and effectively having to relive that trauma all over again. So I imagine in many ways where we've talked about permissions and rights and consulting with people but still retaining that creative license to represent things, I don't think it's so much disrespect. I think it's perhaps that the people running the show recognised we can't, they don't want to be overused, they don't want to be exploited, maybe they didn't want to become centerpieces in this drama again. It's a very difficult line to tread where, unless somebody comes forward and says, I really want the story of this tragedy to be told, it's how do you work through those dilemmas? I mean, Peter, you'll know, of course, from working directly with Alistair, like he has very much come to you and said, I want this to come out and untold and in the podcast, but
it was
in other
traumatizing
cases,
for him.
yes.
He'd sort of resist it, and he wanted to talk about it in order to forget about it. And he would break down or just, I can't talk about this anymore. I'm reliving it again. It might be, see, when you fictionalize somebody at a different level, had they used the opening testimony, I don't know why they didn't use more.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with using their testimony near Leveson. But there is a stricture, there's quite a level under Ofcom whenever you use victims or family of victims of a murder. There's a whole level of due diligence. And that might have been the reason. But there's no, you could have found somebody else. You could have fictionalized a bit. There's other ways you could have done it rather than, and or had, the McCann, the other Soham, they could have been the ones. Yeah. It is a very difficult thing that you don't want to tread on somebody's life rights. They have copyright in that. But also, the reverse has happened. It was just disrespecting them by
Yes.
burying them. And I think I cannot speak on Alistair's behalf, but I can imagine he's not brilliantly happy. The story of Daniel Morgan is all the story about the detective on the last one. It's, rather than about the family. His kids are still, of course, he had 2 kids who I met, ex-wife, ex-sister. His mother died without the inquiry, the panel inquiry reporting, just before the panel reporting. So, yeah, but if you're a big TV producer and you've just done The Office of Mr. Bates, you've got a responsibility to get that right.
Yeah.
I did feel quite moved in that scene when Nick is having to explain to their faces the why, because for them, of course, as ordinary people, they're just thinking, well, why, why would you need to hack, our daughter's phone?
Yeah.
And he has to say the unsayable, the stuff that's really uncomfortable to say to them. And I did find that actually quite moving and quite empathetic. That I thought that was very sad to kind of talk about the profound nature of, that the human cost of this drive for profit and this drive for, money at any cost.
Well, at that point, to be fair, not to be fair, why should we? They thought they could save her. That's why they got focused in on her. But
but that's comes back to the point you said about show not tell.
Yeah.
Like if we'd have seen some of the offices of some of these news of the world places where they were like, oh, let's hack into this phone, let's find this, then we would have seen the conversations they'd have had about the moralities. Should we do this? Yeah, fuck it.
Yeah.
But I think that dialogue between Nick Davies and Bob and Sally Dowler is it may be again one of these fictionalized moments that's put into that scene, but that recognition that many of the victims of hacking, who may have been reluctant to come forward because they didn't want it to become another story to sell a newspaper, even though it was telling their side and talking about the harm and abuse that they suffered.
But
they
she's on the front page again.
Yes,
their
exactly.
daughter. They're reminded of a dead daughter.
And there's a real kind of, I think, paranoia, which again isn't really demonstrated in the show very well. But there must be a huge level of paranoia involved.
Dealing with journalists.
Dealing with journalists and these.
But I was a dramatist. You drama, talk to me. As soon as I say I'm a journalist, okay, I'm off. Or don't quote me. What, are we just talking about the menu?
Yeah.
I thought that scene, I agree, that scene and the Sienna Miller, that they were the 2 most emotional scenes in it. And that does make me think, if you really want to drive the audience to it, audiences can be confused and get a lot of names, but they got to bloody care.
Yeah.
Like you and that's the point. There's so much roughage to deal with in terms of just the sheer number of names, number of facts to get through.
The number of lives ruined.
And like with all those details and randomly throwing in names, having to be talked through it handheld by Nick Davies as the Deadpool stuff. Like if they'd have just anchored us with this from the start, it'd be so much easier to get through this because we'd know, all right, it matters. Because we're how many episodes in are we? 6
This is
episodes?
Six
Six episodes.
1 left.
6 episodes before we get to the emotional heart of the show. Like, how many people do you like from a commercial standpoint? Do you expect people to get through 6 episodes before you actually give them, hey, here's why you should care?
Yeah.
It's like the mariachi moment, but sort of spread across the whole series, where you have this tonal whiplash. You've just had an incredibly powerful emotional testimony from someone directly affected by hacking, and then there's this sort of quirky, gimmicky presentation to make people chuckle, or Alan Rusbridger's dancing in the toilet. That was sort of spread over the whole show, where the first 2 episodes on the hacking story were very sort of winky, playful, and then towards the end suddenly it's this incredibly powerful heavy-hitting thing about real experience of people. It's like, again, why wasn't that at the front? And maybe you find your way later in the story to have the, all these moments we've talked
just
about.
Don't do them.
Yeah, all these moments of like bizarre revelations about what was going on at News of the World, or the affairs that people were having, and all these weird. Those are the quirky stories that come near the end, where it's like, this whole thing's falling apart. Look how absurd it was. It wasn't just disgusting and despicable. It was absurd.
Yeah.
But to pitch it the other way around, but then to bring in the drama and the emotion near the end felt very strange.
There's a lack of confidence, I think, in the storytelling when it comes to that. I mean, I actually went to see Hamlet the other day at the theatre, and I remembered, like, God, like, this is such a good example of how you create a story where there's so much paranoia and fear. Who means what? Who's real? Who's not? Who's going to stab me in the back? Who isn't? And I was just like, God damn it, like, there could have been ways to really bring that paranoia, that confusion, that fear, infuse that into the story, and I just don't think that comes across at all. But it is that world.
I think that you're right. They haven't chosen the genre, because I was looking at Hammer again recently, or that recently, and Who's There is the first line.
Yes,
and
exactly.
everybody's spying on each other. Even his girlfriend's asked to spy, and he's spying on the son, and then the father's spying on him, then he has to spy back and put this player to player. Then it's all about, it's a spy thriller, it's paranoia.
Absolutely.
It's and I think they didn't just work out their genre. It's a partly in a cold case police show. We're going to dig up Daniel Morton. And then it's a kind of
happy-go-lucky journalist investigation.
Well, it's hold the front page. There are some good classic comic stories about that. All the President's Men is such a false lead, because that's a spy thriller, right? It's them against the government, and it's the FBI officer, we realise eventually is Deep Throat, many decades later. And what is the genre of this?
I'm glad you mentioned All the President's Men, because I brought a prop. I brought the Guardian's review. Sorry, not the Guardian's review. I brought Private Eye review of The Hack. And there were two lines in it that stood out to me. And talking about the mariachi moment, they say, The Hack often resembles a remake of All the President's Men, in which Big Bird from Sesame Street keeps leaping out at Woodward and Bernstein as they break Watergate. So again, that genre of like, what's going on? Is it an investigation or is it a sort of quirky comedy? And then the other line... the story is wrapped up in gimmicks and diversions, distracting from what the series and the original investigation really say. I think those two lines capture that problem of genre.
Doesn't enhance the story, it distracts.
No, they didn't know. And again, did they just want moments where the audience is looking at their phone, we need to do something silly to grab their attention?
Can I tell you one of the problems here? And this is me, having spent all those years in drama, now a journalist. If they just dug deeper, the writers, and trusted Nick or trust the journalism. For example, the moment when Jackie Hames is surveyed, you don't see a plan driving off. You've got to remember, she'd seen her friend had been shot dead on the steps of her home, probably, by the way, tracked through phone hacking. Jill Dando, 2 years before. She's still traumatized. She's shot in the back of the head. And she looks out the door. There's a guy with a metal object shooting at her. And she flashes back to that. She's still been traumatized. If they just dug a little bit deeper and then maybe followed that van back, and it's Maz Mahmood in the News of the World, and he's going to do his cricket bloody stuff.
We don't see that, though. We see Dave Cook ironing. That's the perspective we have on...
And then he chases after a van.
While Jackie is presumably still in the house in tears from this new traumatising moment.
And then later we discover why she's so traumatised. But sometimes it is in the detail, digging in the detail. And maybe it's, one always feels that American series, like these great documentaries, the OJ one or the drama as well, do that. Maybe they have time, they have money, and they have a writer's room.
They have a whole writer's room, that's why.
Rather than just one writer. But when I heard about it first, there were only 4 episodes. So suddenly Dave Cook comes along, it's suddenly 7. But Jake Thorne, I feel sorry for him. He has to constantly rewrite 7 episodes. Except one other writer on one of them, I think. You need a writer's room. You need minds. You need 5 people working on this.
And I like what they did in the new show called The Girlfriend. In that show, you've got you got a boyfriend, and then his girlfriend, and then the boyfriend's mother. And what I quite like is how they show the same scene, but from different person's perspective. And sometimes the actual what happens in that scene is different.
Right.
And so in this, what they could have, just basically to show that they were lying to each other or lying to themselves, just basically to show that they're both a bit unhinged. What they could have done with this is actually show her in her head seeing a sniper rifle or rifle at the window.
No, that's what you do. And then what? It's just a van, and then you understand. There's also another moment which is good for me because I'm developing my own drama on this. Do you remember that? You probably wouldn't realise who it was. It was Gary Vian finds a mic in his garden. Right? It's much more fun than that. So he finds a mic in his garden, and they're still listening. He says, "Oh, call Dean in." His stepson is a Metropolitan Police officer, which then blows everybody's mind. And then they get him, they interview him, and he becomes actually a witness against his uncle and says, "My uncle is the Axeman." Sometimes I fear these executives and writers are so high up, they're working under all these pressures. You can feel the notes. This is a bit boring. Bring on a mariachi band, and they're don't have the time to dig into the detail.
Because what I do, if you see the press pack from the show and the interviews, they've really done their research for this. They know as much as we do. They know the stories back to front. They've read all of the inquiry reports, all of the evidence. They've gone back through the historical record, but then they tried to fit it all in 7 hours. And then they've had this top pressure of make it more exciting. And when an executive comes in and says, "Well, I don't understand this bit, so change it to something else."
I'll get somebody to talk to camera or during or a mariachi band. And yes, you're right. And that is the difficult thing, but that's what you've got to do is you find, instead of 3 examples, you find one brilliant one and exploring them.
Let's end with what's the most sort of 2010s thing of this episode? We got anything?
I liked that their mobile phones are changing. They're evolving as the series goes on. We started off with the big bricky Nokia 3210s where you could play Snake and they'd have the little beep bop ringtones. And now we've got Androids, the beginning of smartphones. This was the very start, sort of 2008 through
The
to
death of
2000.
voicemail, essentially. I
The
suppose,
death
as
of
well.
voicemail as well. We're getting smartphones, so it was nice. I mean, it was weird that was the one historical detail where they really paid attention to it. Something to focus on was just the phone. It's maybe a bit of a disease of modern television that everybody's got a smartphone on their hands, that now a regular shot in television is someone with a phone in their hand. I don't remember that being a very common thing in TV 10 years ago, but now every TV show or film or advert shows someone with a smartphone, and it's funny that in these later episodes you can see someone holding an early smartphone.
It's ruined a lot of drama telling because if you imagine my son's missing, I'll just text them.
Yeah.
When you get those weird texts, Dad, I've changed my number, send me £100. No, that's not it.
You have whole dramas now that are played out with the text superimposed, people having conversations.
No, but I think we've got to go down there. That's just like, it used to have print reel. Do you remember in the 1930s movies, the headlines coming out that way?
Yeah.
And even in Godfather, they'll have...
Or the smack of the typewriter, the chyron coming
That's
up.
the beginning of All the President's Men.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So we're actually the technology...
And the end as well.
And the end.
Nixon resigns.
Well, that's a ticker tape. Yes, that's right.
Oh, spoiler.
I know, right?
Sorry.
But what I wonder is, and this is why you say, you go, oh yeah, what's the markers of 2010-11? That's yesterday.
Yeah.
That's literally yesterday. That's 14 years ago for you. You were all at school,
No, but interestingly, I think it is that this is, the original Dave Cook stuff, the first couple of episodes is 2005. The hacking stuff starts 2007, 8.
Yeah.
This is the moment where it's just about within what we might consider modern times.
But the interesting, modernity is not defined. When I was a kid, right, I remember, because I was sort of punk, actually before punk, glam rock, Barry haircut and things, and I watched James Bond movies, and they have these drainpipe trousers. Weird. How do they get away with that? And then I went through punk, and fashion was changing every year. Stacks, suede's one, and then it's Gitan cigarettes and donkey jackets, hair short, and then So... And fashion-wise, how would you tell it's 2000? Is anybody wearing maybe a few more hipster beards, or fewer then, or more
We've
now?
got Stop Coney T-shirts.
I think
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think the issue is that fashion is much more cyclical than phones.
Yeah.
So it's difficult. So,
But it hasn't changed that much. I mean, would you be wearing anything vastly different? Obviously, you'd be much younger, 14 years,
not much.
probably that high.
I would. I wouldn't wear like skinny jeans anymore.
Are they gone?
They're gone. Yeah,
Shoot,
they're in
I
the.
missed that.
Gen Z got rid of them.
Oh, right. Okay,
And none of
good
these
for
ugly
Gen Z.
skinny jeans anymore, apparently.
That gives away my boomer. But the phone is a good way. The other way I do it is actually computer screens. So I remember started watching ER, and they said, and then ER got flat screens, like mid-90s. I want one of those, right? So they just did the ER thing. They all have those flat screens, and then it is very good. When you see those big cathode rays, you imagine these things pouring out ions at us on the television. That is another way, but it is technology. It's not fashion.
Right, let's wrap up there. Thank you very much, everyone. Do you want to see a better media in the world? Then check out the Better Media Bill, the Better Media Fund, and if you want a better media, then support Impress the Regulator. You can find out how at the link list bettermedia.world, which has links to loads of great ways to get involved with making a better media for all.